Hey, Luke here with CaptainCarp.com, and yesterday I put out a post on Facebook asking you guys to give me your best questions so I could help you guys out with some fishing tips and tricks, and you guys did not disappoint. So without further ado, I'm going to answer some of the best questions that were put to me on Facebook. So starting with Carson Tabbitt here said, what are the best inexpensive baits to use for catfish and how do you rig it? Well, the cheapest baits are free. The ones that catch yourself, earthworms, shad, bluegill, clams, crawfish, frogs, that sort of thing. But if you're gonna buy a bait, get something from the store, feed corn is hard to beat. It is extremely cheap, about $5 to $10 for a 50-pound bag. You boil that up, that makes nearly 200 pounds of wet bait. And I like to rig it with a hair rig, though if it's soft and boiled, you can put it directly on a small hook. I have lots of videos about how to tie hair rigs. I'll put links in the description. And I have a video dedicated just to how to catch catfish with corn. So definitely check out Feed Corn. Matt with PGH Bottom Feeders asked for tips and techniques for catching carp without pre-baiting before your fishing session. And now I rarely pre-bait. I just don't have the time to do it. So if you watch my carp fishing videos, 90% of the time, I was not pre-baiting. Until I started filming and fishing, there had been no bait thrown in the water. You don't need to chum and you don't need to pre-bait to catch carp. If you put your bait in front of a carp, you will catch fish. And you can do that with a single worm, a single boilie, a single kernel of corn. The problem is though, if you aren't pre-baiting, if you aren't chumming, you need to be much more precise with where you choose to fish and where you put your bait. Right, so just make sure you put your bait in front of fish and you can do it without chum. Jasper Macy asked what my three boys' favorite fishes are, and Nathan said bass, Tommy said catfish, and Jacob said baby catfish. Rick Volmer asked if I've ever used shrimp, and if so, what do I do with it, whether I use it fresh or cooked. And yes, I have used shrimp. It's an okay bait for bullheads, and it's a great bait for saltwater catfish like hardhead catfish and gaff topsail catfish. But it's expensive, right? So, and it's not particularly more effective than chicken liver or chicken breast, and less effective than shad or bluegill. So I don't tend to use it a lot. Unless I'm in a situation where I've got some old nasty shrimp I need to get rid of, or I just couldn't find anything else. But you can fish it raw or cooked. It doesn't really make much of a difference. Fish for bullheads with shrimp, I tend to fish them under a bobber using a number 2 hook. And I'll often use cooked shrimp because it's a little bit tougher and stays on the hook a little bit better. James Lee Bryan Jr. asked if you have to remove the mud vein when you try to cook and eat carp. Now, I've eaten carp a couple times. I've done several catch and cook videos with carp, and I've never removed the mud vein, and I thought the carp tasted just fine. I have seen one YouTube video where somebody removed a mud vein, and I've heard lots of people claim that that's something you need to do. But every time I've spoke to people who regularly catch and eat carp, none of them remove the mud vein. And frankly, I'm not even sure how to do it. When I've cut open a carp, I haven't even been able to find a mud vein to remove. So I don't think removing a mud vein is particularly important. Shannon Strachkirch, sorry. What specifics do you look for in a location while fishing for blue catfish? In rivers, I look for current breaks in deeper water. Usually I look for submerged snag piles or boulder piles or like a little dip or depression. If you have a drop-off, especially a drop-off where there's an undercut, that's a good spot to look. And you're trying to look for current breaks that are near the current. And that tends to be the best place for blue catfish in rivers. In the wintertime, if it's a sunny day, I'll tend to look in flats that are 4 to 8 feet of water that are near those locations. And the blue catfish will go out on the flats on warm winter days looking for bait. Also, a really classic good winter river spot for blue catfish is where a stream or another river dumps into a bigger river, especially if there's a deep hole at the mouth of that river or creek. That's a good place to look. In reservoirs, I'm a little less confident where to look for specifically blue catfish. They tend to frankly be anywhere that the channel catfish are. But drop-offs, deep channels, tend to work pretty well, but we catch them on flats and in shallows as well. It's a little bit more hit and miss with the reservoirs. David Seabach and Jaden Buchup both asked about locating fish in shallow rivers. Fishing shallow rivers can be really easy. It's a great place to start if you're uncomfortable locating fish. Same thing with small ponds. I find it much easier to locate the fish in a small pond versus a ginormous reservoir. But in small rivers where it's really shallow, look for a place with unusual depth. So if the average river depth is like 2-3 feet, and then you find a hole that's like 6-8 feet, that's definitely some place that deserves your attention. You tend to start at the top of the hole where the current dumps into the hole. That's the first place you cast, because the big fish tend to have a pecking order, and the biggest fish gets the best spot, which is front of the line when food comes into that hole. Other spots are look for crevices in the rock, or if there's kind of a rock face, somewhere near there. Any place a fish could hide, you want to dump a bait in there. If the water is clear, night fishing is key, because when the water is clear and shallow, the fish are extremely exposed, and a large fish is going to be nervous about being out in the open. It could be eaten by a bird or whatever. So night fishing small rivers can be particularly important if the water is clear. Eric Wood asked for my suggestions on what the best shrink tubing, clips, fake horn, etc. is for catching carp. And my answer is it really doesn't matter. I think hooks are really important. You want a good point on your hook. But other than that, the swivels and shrink tubing and clips, get whatever's on sale. If you're here in the U.S., you can go to bigcarptackle.com. Any of the stuff they sell is good quality stuff. It's good enough. Get whatever is cheap. Daniel Dexter, Russ Wilmot, and Brittany Riddle all asked basically the same question: is how do you take kids fishing? How do you take your spouse fishing? Get them interested in fishing? And the simple answer is don't make it about the fishing. Make it about having a good time. And if you catch some fish too, then that's great. What you want to do is get a rod holder and some sort of bite detection, like a bell or a bite alarm or whatever. Set up your rod, get it done quickly, and then go play with your kid. Pay attention to your spouse and do something they want to do. Throw rocks in the river, or chase butterflies, catch newts, or in my wife's situation, string up a hammock and bring a picnic lunch and a beautiful spot by the water. Find something that they enjoy doing and do it with them and pay attention to them. And then occasionally when the bell goes off, go and catch some fish. People also asked how I take my kids in such nasty weather and get them to enjoy fishing, and the key is having good gear, keeping them warm. I highly recommend the adhesive body warmers. You just pull off the sticker, shove it to their undershirt, and it'll stay warm for 12 hours. Put that under your coat, keeps kids really warm. Having a little pop-up tent, you have a little shelter for the kids to get out of the rain, and you keep them warm and bring a tablet, and they're happy all day. My kids honestly aren't that interested in fishing. They're interested in going and playing with dad and going on an adventure and getting out of the house, but the fishing's just a means to the end. Tony Summers from Ohio asked how to deal with a gizzard shad die-off at Lake Erie. It's apparently making things very difficult for him. We had this experience last winter here in my local area, and the key is to just pop locations as quickly as you can. Try a lot of different spots. The catfish are hungrier, they're having harder times finding bait, so when you put bait in front of them, they'll bite it pretty darn quick. But this disruption in the ecosystem has caused them to go and change spots and try different hunting locations. And so that's what you've got to do too. But you don't have to linger long. Just go try a spot. If you don't get a bite in 15 minutes, try another spot. So you're just going to have to try to find some new fishing spots to see where the catfish have moved off to. Zachary Dowell says he just bought a little fishing boat and wants to know what the essentials for a little fishing boat are. I would say keep it organized, keep it simple, and buy short fishing rods. I really like the 3-foot Whisker Seeker rods. They're ice fishing rods, and they're just so much better to use in a small boat where you don't have room. If you're in a kayak, the same rules apply. You just have to follow those rules more strictly because you have even less space. Andy Smith bemoans that he has a 3-acre pond and he uses chicken liver, but he only catches a few small catfish. What can he do to catch more fish? And I get this type of question a lot. The first thing I want to say is it may not be your fault, Andy. There's a lot of ponds and lakes out there that are just terrible. They just don't have the biodensity to support big fish or lots of fish, and it's a struggle to catch anything, and it's not your fault. If you're convinced there are more fish in there or bigger fish in there, some of the things I would look at is mixing up when you fish. Try sunset, sunrise, nighttime. I would also try using more natural baits like live fish or cut up bluegill, and I would move around a lot. Robert Agasibach says, if you could fish one place you haven't been, where would it be? It would be the Amazon, deep in the jungle, because it would be awesome. Stephen Niman asked me for the specific name and locations of some of the fishing spots I've featured in my videos. And this is a really common question. I don't really hide where I go fishing, but I don't post or say the names deliberately because, frankly, I have over 700,000 subscribers, and it's really easy to ruin fishing spots, not just for myself, but for everyone else, by posting their information online. And so I just don't want to be that guy, and I don't do that. Barry Marks asks, what's the best time of year to catch carp? Now is the best time. Spring is amazing. Pre and post spawn, the carp come in shallow, they feed aggressively, they congregate in dense numbers. It can be amazing, and you can pick up big numbers. And in some areas in warmer climates, you get a second smaller spawn in the fall as well. Craig Burkhart asks, in this reservoir, there's a lot of boulders. How do I fish and not get snagged so much? I would say use a bobber or a float, or if you're in a boat, drift fish. Bobbers and floats are more effective than bottom fishing, I think. The reason why you don't see me doing it a lot is because here I can fish 8 to 10 rods at the same time, and I can't do that with bobbers and floats. But if I'm in a situation where I'm restricted to fishing with only one rod, most of the time you'll see me fishing with a bobber or float because they're just so much more effective. As long as the wind isn't too hanky, you can go and cast out and let that bobber slowly drift over a lot of spots, and you can just work an area so much more thoroughly, and you don't have to worry about snags. So I would definitely try using a bobber more. If that doesn't work, try a breakaway lead rig, which is basically a 3-way swivel with your hook coming off the side and your lead down below, and you use a thinner, lighter line for your lead than you do your main line, so that when you get snagged up, you lose your lead, not your whole rig. Ryan Martin asked how to fish heavily pressured lakes, and one of the first things I like to do is just sit back and watch what everyone else is doing, talk to locals, find out what works, and then try to do it a little bit better. First off, use more subtle gear, smaller hooks, fluorocarbon leaders, very thin braids, camouflaged rig components like camouflage leads and swivels and things like that. Also, I like to try to go out a little bit further. See if there's a spot just beyond the reach of the average fisherman that's pretty good. Like there might be a channel or a snag or something that's just a little bit further than most people are able to reach. Then I'll show up with my 10 to 12 foot carp rods, bang it out there a good 40 yards further than everyone else, and now I'm fishing where there is no pressure. Also, the time you fish is really important. If you're fishing in winter time, weekdays, early mornings, at nights, this makes a big difference. I notice a big difference fishing Monday morning versus Friday morning in some of these more popular spots. On Monday morning, the fish have just been hammered all weekend long, and they're just, rattled. By Friday morning, they're calmed down and the fishing's a lot better. The time of day and avoiding the crowds is really important. Joseph Wood asked me, what types of lead should I use and when and how should I use them? Well, I could do an entire video on this, but the most important key is to match the lead with the rod. You want to make sure that your bait, your hook, and your lead are all within the recommended lure weight printed on the spine of your rod. If you don't pair up the right amount of lead with the right rod, your casting performance and distance will suffer greatly. So first things first, make sure you pair up the right amount of lead with your rod. Forrest Williams asked how to choose a bank fishing spot for carp. Carp are easier to spot than most fish. So if you come when the water is glassy smooth, usually around sunset or sunrise, just walk around and see if you can spot them. Spend some time doing that. Otherwise, I look for emergent vegetation with about 3 feet of water ideally. So find a place where there's reeds coming out of the water or lily pads or cattails or grass, and you've got about 3 feet of water, and just bomb it right there along the edge of the weeds, just like 5-6 feet off the edge of the weeds. That's a classic spot, especially in the spring and fall. Jerry Hazelbaker asked, my grandson and I were looking for different knots the other day. Is there one that's actually better than the others? And I said, unless you're really doing high performance fishing, it doesn't matter that much. When knots fail, 90% of the time, it's because they were tied incorrectly. So the key is to find a knot that you can consistently tie right. And that's the knot you should use. Whether or not you get this knot versus that knot, that only makes a slight difference. But if you tie that knot wrong, that makes a big difference. So choose simple knots that you're confident you can do right every time. This is one of the reasons why I really like the polymer knot. It's a very simple, easy to do knot. Justin Wilcox and Logan Jones both asked about barometric pressure and moon phases. And frankly, I just don't pay any attention to those things. I think fish are feeding whenever they can get their hands on food. It really doesn't matter what the moon's doing. But that's just me. Some people disagree. Andy Mathern asked, what's the most important factor in fishing? Location, equipment, bait, presentation? It's location. 100% location. Location's more important than all of the other factors combined. And if you're not catching enough fish, it's most likely because you're not putting your bait in front of enough fish. Location is everything. Cody McGee says he's recently moved to a new state and would like some tips on how to find new fishing spots. Cody, I've done several in-depth videos on this, breaking down how to look for fishing spots in lakes, another one on rivers, another one on ponds, and I'll put links in the description to 3 of those videos here on this video, so definitely check that out. There's a lot of tips there. Chris Schirkold asked, does color really matter with carp, or is it all about smell? I read a fascinating article where a gentleman had done a bunch of scientific experimentation on an aquarium full of carp, where he presented them with different baits and things and saw what they reacted to and what they wouldn't. Color mattered a little bit. The color yellow was hands down the most popular, but definitely the bait was more important. And it was interesting because artificial flavors mattered very little and didn't really produce any results. It was the actual bait itself that mattered. Powdered eggs was the most popular bait he presented to the carp. And powdered eggs is a common ingredient in most commercial boilies, which is a very popular carp bait. This has led me to further believe that the artificial colors and flavors in boilies really don't matter that much. So whether you buy mulberry flavor versus peach versus krill, I don't think it really matters that much. I think it's the eggs and the flour in the boilies that are really make them attractive. And I think the colors and smells are more for the fishermen. Now, this is not 100% true, but I think it's mostly true. Forrest Williams asked, what is your go-to hook size for new places and testing the waters? I tend to use different size hooks depending on the species and size of fish I'm targeting, but when I'm fishing a new body of water, I tend to go on the smaller side because you can always catch big fish with little hooks, but you can't catch as many small fish with big hooks. So when I'm not sure what I'm going to get, I tend to go smaller. Well, guys, that's it. I really appreciate all the excellent questions you guys sent me on my Facebook page. We don't have comments enabled on our YouTube channel, and I'm really hard to get a hold of by email and message. So if you guys have any questions, definitely like our Facebook page, follow us, and leave comments. And we're glad to help you out whenever we can. Hope these videos are useful. We have, I think, over 500 fishing videos on the Catfish and Carp YouTube channel. So if you have a question, definitely go into the video section of my YouTube channel and use the search function. And odds are you're going to find a video that answers your questions because we've got a lot of videos. But anyway, thanks for watching. Click subscribe, and we will see you guys next Saturday morning. Thanks.